Jews still God's chosen people. There had been something that happened that I was confused, and Sean taught that lesson, and I'm like, that makes perfect sense. Because I'm like, why are they taking their land? And I'm like, oh, Lord, that makes perfect sense.
It's a process.
It is such a process.
It's a process. We all have something.
And you think you got it figured out, you get into Romans.
Lots of light bulbs, that's
Yeah.
okay.
But yeah, it's definitely a learning process. It's just, oh wow, I was wrong about
Say,
that.
Micah, Micah.
Even marriage,
Nice talk there.
I was thinking,
That'll work, dude.
you know, if you're not a Christian, you're in sin anyway, so it doesn't matter if you divorce. And then Sean talked about that and did the thing, and I'm like, oh, that's for everybody.
Barely.
It is
But we're here.
It is a pronouncement. It is a pronouncement for everyone, and it's not that you can't be forgiven of the sin,
Or the
but it would be like me going out and
goodwill
committing
was right
murder
yesterday, isn't it?
and then going to prison
I think
and
a
then
lot, everybody's off from
being
school,
saved,
so.
which I know of a lot of cases of this has actually happened to people who actually accept the gospel and they believe
There
it.
were.
They don't just let you out of prison
It's
anymore.
just kind of something to do
You
now.
still have to suffer the
Yeah.
the earthly
Once
consequences
y'all
for
go
your
back to
action,
college, give it a
and even
month,
though our
and
laws of our land don't
after
have
they've
those
gone cleaning
consequences.
everybody. Yeah,
I was telling
like we've
Mike,
gotten 7 bags
Yeah,
from our
we
own.
do. God's laws.
I was telling Mike and Drew that
And it's like,
we'll have to
and
figure
I've
out
heard Rich say
when we
this
get
a lot
back,
of times.
for the
I just wish you wouldn't have wrote those in
You
there,
go
it would
to,
made our life a whole lot
the
easier.
VA store, they
Yeah,
give you a
especially
plastic bag, and
Yeah,
there's no
it's
charge.
ignorance of God's law is not,
You
it's not
go
apparent.
to your
Doesn't mean
physical,
that you're gonna have the
limit on 2
consequence, and
coats.
that's part of it.
Other than that,
Really?
Howdy.
So,
You give
but
me
anyway,
gas.
You mean like fill it all?
I'm just feeling better.
How's so the dog won round
Well,
one, are you gonna win round two?
That's your book, I put it in there.
Goodness, he's home. I get to actually see you before you
Yeah,
go
you know. Thank goodness, oh my, go to the doctor first. But 2 days later, I said, oh, my arm's swelled up, all ready to go. So I went to my doctor now, it's always open.
Isn't she
Shot my arm,
fantastic?
so I'm completely bruised on it. And then, teeth, fractures, and that's all. Yeah, this is just whole thing here.
Yeah.
The scratch, there's no telling where those paws.
Good.
So, but I'm on antibiotics, I'm just feeling run down.
so we gotta go see
I'm okay.
grandma now.
Well, it's just the thing, you know, he's not a bad dog, he's not vicious, really.
Good. He kind of just,
You know,
I thought it was
But
just kind of
because
like.
it has a pen open, and these little silky chickie was sitting on her eggs, facing me, and to hatch them. And he came in and ate them all. And so I was upset. I reacted. And
Oh,
then
yeah.
he-
Welcome back.
Hey, thanks.
So that, the doors are shut, so he can't even get in there. Anyway.
Speaking of doors shut.
That was me.
The door's shut, but you can get in.
How's Tennessee?
It was good. It was a
Very
wonderful,
good.
wonderful holiday.
Chilly?
Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit of chilly and then, you know,
Not as chilly as it's gonna get.
I'm telling you.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, this coming week, yeah,
Yeah.
snow. Well, I guess this is our class. We're finishing up Romans 7. Romans chapter 7. There's been a war going on. I think even the Bible gives us a few clues even before the earth was formed. And what is that war? Who are the combatants in this war, and how's that going? This does apply actually to chapter 7, and we'll get to it another step or two down the road. But what is this a war between? Overarching thing.
Good and evil.
The war between good and evil. It's a war between good and evil. And it's been going on. You can see clues of that in the book of Jude and in Peter's writings, where the angels even who fell They're in chains now in darkness awaiting the judgment. So something went on out there that's way above our pay grade of good and evil. Now, Paul indicates this war is still going on in chapter 7. And on the surface, it looks like at times we may be losing it. Well, how does he describe this war? Good and evil, yes. The war between what? He calls it the war of the flesh. And what is that? Sins of the flesh, war of the flesh. I'll hold that thought. There's a war of the spirit. And where's that fought? Where's that fought? What's the battleground for war of the spirit?
Heart.
The heart, the mind. Where was the war? Where were the works? Where was the law written originally? On what? Tables of stone, tablets of stone. Where is this spirit nature that we have, where there's war going on, as Paul says in chapter 7? Where is that? It's written in our hearts. Someone turn and just read it out loud. Hebrews chapter 8, verses 10 through 30. Well, you can go through 14 if you want to. That's the last verse. 10 through 14. Read it out loud if you would. Michelle, you got it?
I do. Hebrews 8, 10 through 14. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, says the Lord, I will put my laws into their minds, and I will write them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall not teach everyone his fellow citizen, and everyone his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for all will know me, from the least to the greatest of them. For I will be merciful to their iniquities, and I will remember their sins no more. When he said, a new covenant, he has made the first obsolete. But whatever is becoming obsolete is growing old and is ready to disappear.
Okay.
Page number 14. Okay.
And Paul talks about that through, the works of the law. And we've got the works of the flesh and works of the spirit. I thought we buried that fleshly man or fleshly woman in Romans chapter 6. Did we not? Didn't we bury them in the first 4, 5, 6 verses? Remember that
Yes.
analogy? Did we crucify the old man? In a sense, in a figure, we did. We got up on the cross with Jesus, Romans 6. In a figure. And we died to this old man of sin. This old woman, if you will, of sin. I'm hesitant to put old and woman in together. A lot of get in trouble. But anyway, this old man of sin, this old woman of sin. And they died on that cross. And what do you do with dead people? You bury them, Romans 6 and verse 4. And how were they buried? With dirt. Here again, it's like a metaphor. It's an analogy. They died in water. They were buried. It's what you do with dead people. You bury them. Buried them in water, and they were raised to walk a new life. Okay, I guess that's the end of the problem. Because it said our sins were buried there with him. The old man and old woman was buried there with him. So I guess that's our get out of jail free card. Now, all of that's true. I mean, that did happen. But what does Paul indicate in chapter 7? That this war is still going on. We are still a target. We're still a target. Even, when did this start again? Could we say the Garden of Eden? Yeah, we can. And did Satan use God's own words? He did. Satan quoted scripture with Jesus. So anybody can quote scripture, doesn't make it so. I mean, it's so, but not because they said it. So we see The lust of the, what were the three ways to sin? Still valid today. Lust of the eye. Lust of the flesh. And the what? Pride of? Okay. How might we say the pride of life? What might be another? Could we say arrogance? Could we say pride? Well, pride of life. Proud probably is as good as you can get. And he did that with, here's this fruit. It looked good. Lust of the eye. Lust of the flesh, it makes, well, that might be more the pride of life. It makes you wise.
Tasted good.
And it tasted good. So the lust of the flesh. So can you think of any sins today where those three things are not applicable? A sin where that does not have one or all of those? I can't think of any. Still valid today. Satan is still active today. And even with Paul, we'll get to some of the questions here in a second. I mean, the Apostle Paul struggled with this. He surely did. He surely did. That's kind of where we left off on Sunday. Any thoughts or questions there, Greg?
Just maybe just a quick thing. We talked a lot about this marriage example that he had used in the first of the chapter, and then we get back to, by the time we get to verse 13 or verse 11, sin seizes an opportunity. He starts talking about there to deceive me again, and this is the analogy I would have. So we were married to a different spouse. And just like in baptism we buried that old man, using his analogy, that old spouse is now dead, we think, and therefore we're free from the law of that spouse. And that's the point he makes. Well, what happens if that old spouse, while it's dead to you, you're not married to it anymore, it's like an old girlfriend keeps calling you up. You're married to your new bride in Christ. And it keeps calling you up going, don't you want to come back? Don't you want to come back? Don't you want to be with me again? And I think that's, when you think about the struggle that's here, that while our way of life is buried and put behind us, the call to that way of life wasn't buried. Satan is the one who makes that call. And if we keep picking up the phone and answering and chatting with the old spouse, we're going to find out that we get ourselves in a mess. And that's almost what Paul is talking about in this chapter. Getting yourself back in the mess you were in before.
Well, how long does this last? A good point. How long does this last? I mean, surely at 75, 76, no? No? I mean, Nelma's 94. She said she's tempted in different ways, but it doesn't go away. It's as long as you're breathing and living. Satan is not going to let you up, or he's not going to try not to let you up.
We gotta stop picking up the phone.
Yes. And answering,
Text.
yeah, email, whatever. Yeah, no, we've got to stop picking up the phone. And in any context you want to think about, stop picking up the phone. Flee from the devil. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Forever? Oh no. No, he didn't give up that easy. Austin?
That is what was, I think that's what one of the questions in chapter 6 is, on page 15, the one that kind of hit it was, calls personification of sin as the monster. It's
Yep.
like it just kind of brings it tells you how big the enemy really is. You know, we defeated the monster in baptism, chapter 6, but the monster wants you back in its control. Don't give in and don't give up the victory that you now have in Jesus. But that monster didn't disappear. In fact, you might be more of a prime target now than you were.
We are. We're going to.
The picture was really good on God's behalf.
It is a personification of a monster. He even says, I think in verse 20, 21, pardon me, go back to verse 19 just real quickly. It ties into what you're saying. For the good that I will to do, I don't do. But the evil I will not do, that I practice. Now, if I do what I will not do, it is no longer notice. It is no longer I who do it, but the sin that dwells in me. I find then a law that evil is present with me, the one who wills to do good. And he goes on down to, in verse 24, and we've all been there, I suspect. Paul says, "Oh, wretched man that I am." I think, is this a danger for new converts? It's a danger for all of us, but for a new convert who just came out of the world and maybe with these issues. Could be drinking, could be cussing, it could be drugs, it could be any all manner of things. And they're baptized for the remission of sins, just like the Bible talks about. And you wake up the next morning and what?
It's all still there.
It's still there. It's still there. Still there. Now you got to fight it. You have help now. You have brothers and sisters that'll help you. Plus you've got God who will help you, and of course Jesus and as our advocate, he will help you. But it's still there. It's not a self-help program where, well, once I do that, I pretty much got this now. No, you pretty much don't. In fact, that's what these last chapter or two has been about. This self-help. Pardon me. Let's look at question number 1. Paul attacks the idea that more rules and more laws can help the Christian keep from sin. Why doesn't that work? He's talking about the old law. Remember, what were the Jews telling the Gentiles? You need to be keeping that law, like we do, by the way. And Paul just destroyed that in the first 2 or 3 chapters. But why does that not work? More rules, more laws. Got us a checklist. Did this and this and this, and we talked Sunday, and now I guess I'm ready to go to heaven. No, it's not about that. Why not?
It's on your heart. Doesn't matter the list. You'll never finish the list.
You'll never finish the list. It's about your heart. It's about your heart. While God's law reflects his moral nature, it does. Whether it's the old law or the new law, it reflects God's moral nature of things. By design, that's how he designed it. But we cannot keep it perfectly. And sometimes, what are our reactions sometimes when we can't keep it perfectly? You know, we've yielded to that again. We said that. I shouldn't have done that. Oh, wretched man that I am.
Give up. Give up.
Frustration. Oh, man. Been there. Frustrating. I want to do this, but I'm not doing it. Frustration. What else? Somebody said, who said give up? Sometimes you just say, it's not worth it. I'll just give up. Wrong answer, but sometimes we feel that way. What other reactions might there be? Shame. That's a big one. That's a really big one. If they only knew what I did, or what kind of person I was before, or how I slipped back into that again, kind of a thing. Oh, wretched man that I am. Shame. And what can shame make you do or not do? Shame.
Can be a corrector of behavior.
It can be.
Can be. Or it can put you in a spot where you feel like you're not worthy of the grace of God, or you slip into a depression or something like that, and then you're in an unhealthy state where you're not being productive.
Yeah. It can depress us.
Lead to you can spiral down and just keep going and going instead of trying to come back up.
Sometimes we may not come back. If you get so low, that's a real danger of all of that. You may not make it back. And that's what Satan wants. But the correct thing with shame is, I'm going to pick myself up, I'm gonna dust myself off. I'm gonna ask God for forgiveness. I'm gonna keep moving. It's a long distance race. This is not a 100. We don't say 100-yard dash anymore. What do they call the thing? A meter or something? 100-meter or something. It's not a dash. It's a long distance race, and we're going to have this. I think Austin said in one of our classes, we're going to have these ups and downs, but what should the trajectory be? Up and down, up and down. But if you draw the lows and draw the highs, a straight line, you're on the right path. Yes, I fell. Yes, I made a mistake. Yes, I shouldn't have said that. Yeah, probably shouldn't. But, Lord, I'm sorry. I won't do that again. I'll try my best not to do that again. As Carol says, in here, it's the heart. Because you cannot do enough. Well, I'll just try harder. Well, maybe you can try harder. But trying harder is not going to get it done either without Jesus. We're going to see that starting in chapter 8, the first several verses. Because here again, you leave here and you go, oh, wretched man that I am. And then we talked about Jesus in the first 4 or 5 verses. That's our solution. Greg?
You know, particularly this first question here about more laws. When you think about it, when I try to justify myself by doing more of the checklist, doing it more thoroughly, who's at the center of the equation?
I
I am. I can get myself out of this. I can do better. I can do. What is that on the board over here? Drops right into pride of life, right? I mean, it is the danger of law keeping. The Pharisees were an example of pride of life in Jesus' days, and they just hounded them. Again, it was that we are better than other people because we do a better job of keeping the law. That's pride. That's just sin having you right there. It's only when you get to that trust in God that you can go, God, I can't do it. Help me. That you actually can get His help to get out of these things. And that's the insidious nature of trying to keep the law. Is it ultimately points me toward pride.
Yeah, for sure. Good point. We're going to sin, but it should not be a way of life. That's who we are. No, who we are is we're children of righteousness trying our best to get to heaven, and we're going to make a few blips along the way. What John say in 1 John 1? If you say you didn't sin, go ahead, Austin.
Well, finish that. I was going to 1 John, but I'll.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, finish that.
If you say we haven't sinned,
We lied and truth.
we're a liar. That's a strong word, liar. God said that. But if you walk in the light as He is in the light, in other words, it's a continuation. It's a present active tense of the verb, this word walk, even in Romans 7. It's our way of life. Now go ahead, Austin.
You know, I kind of think back to the slave master analogy that he was kind of bringing forth in the last chapter. Every time you sin doesn't mean you flipped over to be sin as your master all of a sudden because I did something I shouldn't have. Whatever. You're still, Jesus is still your master. We don't flip flop every little time something goes wrong. And I think maybe that's how sometimes we can get down on ourselves and thinking that I've switched teams or whatever. It's like, no, you haven't switched teams. You made a mistake. It's okay. You're still working for Jesus. In 1 John, the idea, I think it was either you or Greg, I don't remember, but there was an assurance that Jesus did His part and continues to do His part. But the assurance that we can give ourselves, I like in 1 John, that He uses the word knowing a lot there.
Mm-hmm.
And by this we know that we know Him. I mean, that's like triple stamp and a double stamp there. How do you know? Well, I'll tell you how you know that you know. If you love Him, you keep His commandments. And it kind of repeats that multiple times about knowing this and knowing that. So He knows who His children are.
Yep.
And we should know who our servant is. Mistakes, yes. But if we're trying to do what's right, that should give you the emphasis to keep going. But the knowing there is big.
Absolutely, it's huge. Can you imagine, and I know people that, at least they used to believe this, that every time we sin, we're out of grace of God. Our names are written off or erased off the book of life. I don't believe that for a second. But there are members of the church, some in this building, who at least used to think that every time we sin, God's got with his gigantic eraser, and he'd have to have a huge one. Well, let's see. There's Micah. I rub his name out. Oh, wait a minute, he just repented. Well,
Probably a
okay.
pretty big hole in that
Micah
book.
back in again. We can't live like that. We would be nuts. We would be nuts if we had to live like that. Oh no, I was going 62 and a 55. Get the eraser out. No. Now, if it's a way of life where you constantly do that, then your name can be erased. But that's not a way to live, and God knows that. It's not a way to live. You'd be in a loony bin.
Well, that's where grace comes in.
It's all about that, isn't it? It's all about that.
We're not perfect people, we're forgiven people.
And we talked early on. I think that's where we need to come across that way too. To not only with each other, but to visitors that come in, who bring a lot of baggage. And the last thing we want, someday, you'll be as good as I am. No. We don't want to ever come across like that to anybody. We're all sinners, that God's grace has saved us if we continue. And you're welcome here as a sinner. Questions or thoughts on that? Yeah, have you been places where that didn't come across that way? When you're visiting? I have. Other thoughts on that? Okay, let's look at. I think we've hit number 2 pretty good. Number 3. We have this one too. This won't take but a minute or so. Is the law our problem? Is God's law the reason people sin? I mean, think about it. If there are no laws, did you violate any law?
You have chaos.
It'd be totally chaotic. But there are. What does law do? He even uses the analogy here of envious. How would I have known that it's a sin to be envious unless what? Unless it was specified in the law. So it makes things apparent to us. The law did, and the New Testament does. It makes things that we should do, things we shouldn't be doing, things that we say, things we shouldn't be saying. It makes that apparent to us, that law, and it brings sin to our minds so we can take care of that. So law served a purpose. The New Testament served a big purpose. But boil it all down in one word, it's God's grace. If any of us make it, it'll be because of God's grace. Now, we have works we have to do, works of righteousness that the New Testament calls them, but we can't do enough of them. I was talking to a family member back in Kentucky this week. She said, I really got to get this box checked on, I was going to read through the whole Bible in a year, and that's a noble thing to do. And I'm going to have to read all day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, in order to be able to check that box. Well, that's fine. That's a noble thing to do, read the Bible in a year. But what if you didn't make it? Were you a failure because you didn't check the box? No, not at all. Not at all. But we have that mentality sometimes. Let's check the boxes. And because if we do enough, God's going to accept us. Well, there are things for us to do, but God's going to accept us because of Jesus. We're going to see that in chapter 8 and the work of the Spirit. Okay. Now, number 4 should be some interesting comments. Who do you think is the wretched man in Romans 7:13 through 25? That's one part. How can you best make the case for your conclusions, and what are the biggest weaknesses of your conclusions? You have to think about this one now. Who's this wretched man, or at least what are some of the options of who this wretched man was or is? Oh, wretched man that I am.
I think it's all of us.
Okay. He's using first person here. Could it be Paul?
He's personalizing it, but
He is
he's
personalizing it.
speaking about all of us.
Well, the
He's
whole
not
Bible's
saying
about
it's
all of
just
us,
me.
but yeah.
I mean, me, Paul, I never thought of him speaking just of himself. He's using I and we.
Interesting. I mean, the point is about us for sure. But what does he say when he says, I have to be careful and follow the Bible? That's paraphrasing. Lest I become a castaway. Lest I myself become a castaway. I think it's in Galatians, if I remember right. I didn't write it down. You mean to say that Paul could have lost Paul could have been a castaway? Is it possible to become a castaway once you're saved? I know it's Wednesday, folks, but you got to pick it up just a little bit. Okay, it's probably a poorly worded question. We'll go on. This wretched man.
One possibility that Mark talks about in the book is it could be my old sinful man, the one that was buried, but just recognizing that it was there. And so that would be one possibility, that this wretched man is the man of sin that we hope to bury through baptism, but just recognizing how wretched that he was, and still recognizing the struggles that I had when that man was still alive inside of me. That is one possibility.
One possibility, yes. What does 1 Corinthians 9 and verse 27 say? Someone turn to that. Now, this is the great Apostle Paul, who I think is talking about himself, but as Carol said, I think it's a much bigger picture than that. He's talking about us. But what does he say in 1 Corinthians 9 and verse 27? And why would he say that? Anybody want to read that?
But I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become
That's the one, yeah. He disciplines his body, brings it, what, in Janelle? Into subjection, lest, what's the danger if I don't do these things?
I become disqualified.
I become disqualified. I become a castaway. Paul? Yes. So there's a lesson for us. Absolutely. We have to discipline our bodies. We have to bring our bodies into subjection. Or we can lose it. We can be lost. That's kind of a tough one, but that's what he says. So if that was Apple to Paul, you better believe it's Apple to Mitch. I couldn't carry his shoes. And yet that's how he viewed himself. So I think that's how we need to view ourselves. Now, that being said, what does that say about this battle of sin? Battle of sin. Battle against sin, if you want to think of it like that.
None of us are immune.
We're not immune. What else?
It's ongoing.
It's ongoing. It's continual. And it keeps that way until we draw our last breath.
And we don't win the battle
We don't win it.
in and of ourselves.
We don't. Does anybody in this room on occasion have any inner conflict? I see some smiles because I'd be smiling with you. There is inner conflict. there are these two voices, so to speak. The sinful side and the spiritual side. It's no big deal to do that. Yes, you should be doing that. It's an internal conflict. It goes on all the time, and we have to be careful not to get too discouraged about that, because that's natural. Otherwise, as Nicole said, if it gets a hold of us and takes us down, we may get past the point of no return, and we don't want to be there. So, we have to be aware of these things. Have to be aware of these things. Any other thoughts on that?
I had one, Mitch.
Okay.
In Mark's book, he talks about Paul's description of himself, the thought of this being a description of himself and trying to overcome sin. And I guess one thought I had on this is he talks about if it was him talking about himself as a failing Christian, then we'd expect the section to end with a big bang and he announces his victory in Jesus. And what I thought is, again, good time to remember, this was chapter breaks that man put in.
That's
So
right.
we need to go to chapter 8. We gotta at least read the first couple of verses.
That's it.
Because, yeah, it does end on kind of a low note, but keep reading. It gets better.
It gets better, and chapter 8's going to be a lot better.
So I think that kind of blows out his argument. I thought was my thought.
No, that's fair, Carol. But when you get through the first 4 verses or so of chapter 8, we go,
Yeah,
okay,
okay, I can stop now.
I think I'm going to be all right. I think I'm going to be all right. And how do you think the Romans felt up to this point?
If they stopped at a chapter break,
Oh, my
probably
word.
kind of low.
They would have been, this guy who we've never seen, by the way, Paul's never been here. He's beating us down. And they needed that. And then we get to our, what we call chapter 8, and we go, okay, I get it now. It's going to be all right. Question number 6 on the back side of your questions there. Reflecting on your own life. How have you experienced a tension between the desire to follow rules and regulations and the reality of struggling against sin? That's a real thoughty question. How have you experienced this tension between the desire to follow rules and regulations and the reality of struggling against sin? I'm checking all these boxes. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Why am I frustrated? Why am I sad? Why am I angry? Why am I feel hopeless? I may as well, why try? We've touched on it already, but has anybody else ever had those issues? Where you go,
If you color inside the box and inside the lines, you might find yourself frustrated. There's a lot of stuff that's outside the box.
Yeah. Everything's not black and white. Yeah.
Mm-mm.
We try to make it that way.
Some of us.
Sometimes. We do. We do. Kimberly.
I think as I've kind of matured in my faith and I've seen the gravity of that struggle, that's where I've had more thankfulness for that grace. When I've seen like this is warfare. It's spiritual warfare. And when you realize how hard that attack comes in, then it's a little bit easier to hang on that grace, because like Greg said, like we don't win it. There's no way I win this.
You can't win it on your own. You will lose the battle 100% of the time on your own. Can't be done. That's why we're here for one another. And that's why we have prayer. And that's why we have a mediator. And that's why the Holy Spirit said that he delves into the deep things of God from us. We have help. We have help because you can't do it by yourself. Can't do it. Michelle?
I think too, because I can relate to what Kimberly's saying too. I also think, in most of the other parts of our lives, whether it's parenting or our secular job or those kinds of things, a lot of things that we do are calendared, scheduled, lists, I mean, that is like my bread and butter. Like, I am a list maker. And so that's difficult sometimes whenever you take that mindset, which is woven through you pretty deeply, when you bring that to something like, you know, your spiritual nature,
More
your
open-ended.
faith, you know, and you're like, well, no, I just give me little boxes to check. And I know we said that a lot, but like, I think that's tricky for maybe more my kind of a personality, where I am a list maker, a check, and I'm like, sweet, I go to bed tonight, all done, feeling good. And you'll feel empty if you try to bring that over into your spiritual life. I think that's tricky for me sometimes. And maybe it's just my personality, because I'm.
No, I think we've all at times feel that, because if we try to check all those boxes, we'll wake up feeling empty almost every day. I didn't get it all done today. I didn't get it all done. I didn't check all the boxes. I don't know who you came from, but that I got a little OCD in me. You know, if your paint is in alphabetical order in your garage, you probably got an issue.
Sounds organized to me. I don't know.
Yeah. Jason would go, what? I don't even have paint. But yeah, go ahead, Greg.
You know, first you started off about, and this is another source of the struggle. God's going to write his law on the hearts of his people, which is, we know is talking about us. You go back and read Psalm 19, written by David, a man who was after God's own heart. And David talks about how wonderful life is for those people who follow God's rules. There's a part of, I want to live by God's law because I want the outcomes that come because I live by God's law. Because God, if I actually do what God said, I'll have better outcomes in this life. And when I suffer a bad outcome in this life and recognize, okay, that's because I sinned, but the disappointment is I failed to get some of the benefit I could have in this life. And so this is the struggle is between how to not just say, well, I'm going to mess up, so big deal. Does grace make sin irrelevant? No, it's not irrelevant.
No, it doesn't.
We're going to see in the next chapter on Sunday when we get there that there is a righteous penalty for sin that somebody had to suffer. And the fact that I don't have to suffer, it doesn't mean I diminish my sin. On the other hand, I've got to flip this over and go, but God knows if I don't do all of his law today, I've got the next day in service to him to try to do what's best. And that struggle between feeling imperfect and wanting the benefits of living by a godly life is also a part of this struggle. Oh, wretched man that I am, I missed out on something because I didn't listen to God today.
Yeah, that's true. Was that the first or second? Second. Do you have 8 or do I have 8?
I have 8.
I've been studying on 8 just in case, but you've got all of 8. I think I've got the second half of 8, don't I?
Yeah, you've got a part of it.
Got a part, yeah. Okay.
I've got a little presentation on Sunday, but we'll figure it all out.
Okay. All right, chapter 8 Sunday. Thank you all.